Welcome to the Rustic Garden Homestead. Today's video is all about using shade cloth in the high heat of summer. One of the best things you can do, and we're going to focus on tomatoes, peppers, talk a little bit about cucumbers, but one of the best things you can do for your tomato plants is to drop a shade cloth over them. I'll go over a couple ways to do this, talk about the different types of shade cloth, 50% shade cloth, 70% shade cloth, etc. But the shade cloth really keeps that 95, 100, sometimes 110 degree temperature from beating down on your tomatoes and just shutting them down. The high heat will shut the tomato plants down. That means they're going to drop flowers, drop fruit maybe not create more flowers, they're going to turn yellow. You're protecting them from the heat, the sunlight hitting the leaves, but more importantly, you're keeping the soil down here much cooler. When the soil really warms up and gets into those high temperatures and sun beating down on the soil, I'm using basil here as a way to help keep the soil cooler, that's another tip. But when that sun is just baking the top of the soil, it can raise soil temperature up to 100, 110 degrees. That gives the tomato plant the signal to shut down. And you can just see, all the great tomatoes that are still in here. This plant's starting to get a little bit of a disease on the leaves. I'm going to be doing a video today also on managing your tomatoes, peppers, squash and cucumbers come August, late summer. Still producing, the shade cloth is making all the difference. Using shade cloth over here with cherry tomatoes, and if you can see right down there, still producing. I'm getting a lot of tomatoes out of there. Straight back there, more tomatoes. This is a 50% shade cloth. Let's take a look at the peppers real quick. Peppers tend to handle the heat better, so this is actually a 40% shade cloth, which means it blocks 40% of the sun. Shade cloth creates shade, but it's always letting sun into the space or onto the plants. If I pull this away, just look how, this is probably my third, harvesting round on these peppers, and they look pretty good. Peppers are still producing, flowers are still coming on, and it's just been really nice production in here. Simple 40-50% shade cloth on here has really helped the peppers continue through our high heat summer. Now, I say high heat summer, I'm in Maryland Zone 7. Typically, we get a lot of rain. We haven't been getting that since the first week of June. Temperatures have been 95 plus. The next couple of days, we're going to be approaching 100 degrees. Getting that shade cloth out mid-July really can make a difference. Here's another example of how I'm using the shade cloth. Just set up basically a curtain. You want to get a shade cloth that has the grommets on it so you can use it in different ways and secure it in different ways. Tomato plants, they're still beat up, but they're looking pretty good. We'll get in closer with the different tomatoes, talk about how to use the shade cloth with them, how to use it with the pepper plants. I haven't used shade cloth with this cucumber plant. I have in the past. Still have cucumbers forming. This is a national pickling. Look at all the tiny cucumbers on there. This guy is just going crazy. The whole key to success for this plant, and I am using a little bit, there's a fruit tree back there that's providing some shade down there. The soil is staying a little bit cooler, but the leaves are really green. These cucumbers are going to be coming off. There are so many cucumbers on here, and the plant just keeps producing. Take a look at that one. That one's a little bit oversized. Here's one that's up and coming. We got one right back there. So the focus is on tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. So when do you start using shade cloth? Today is August 1st. Since the first week of June here in Maryland, it's been really in the 90s. A couple days we had breaks, very little rain. Plants shut down when the soil temperature really heats up. That top couple of inches can heat up easily to 100 degrees. So when do you want to use shade cloth? For tomatoes, if your temperatures are staying in the low, mid 90s, you want to start using the shade cloth. They tend to drop fruit sooner, produce less when that heat comes. And just one method real quick is using, this is a 70% shade cloth. I recommend buying either a 50% shade cloth or a 70% shade cloth. Those are the two main tools that I would use. And I'm just pulling this across. Before we get to that, two other things that are really important for maintaining coolness in the soil, that's mulch and regular watering. When your plants are this large, these are over 6 feet tall, and I soak, I do a watering, I soak everything in really good. it's 95 degrees, 100 degrees, all that water can be used up very, very quickly. You almost want to be watering every day. If you have mulch, maybe every other day, but mulch and water. Keep the soil cool, keep the roots cool. When those roots get that signal that it's really, really hot, that's when your tomato plants start shutting down. So something like this, the southern sun comes rolling in this way, and this kind of cools the soil off. It works really, really well. 6, 7 feet tall, it's really hard to get a shade cloth over that, so this method works. Spinning around this way, pepper plants. Pepper plants tend to do better in the heat. When it's 95, 100 degrees regularly, that's when I'm going to pull out the 50% shade cloth. You know, if you're definitely, number one, if you're in the hundreds, if you're in the upper 90s, hundreds, you're going to want shade cloth on your peppers, your tomatoes, and your cucumber plants. Tomato plants, you can go with a 50% to 70% depending on where you are. If you're definitely in that 100-degree temperature for prolonged days, you want a 70% shade cloth on your tomato plants in general. So I just want to give you some basic guidelines. For the peppers, 50% shade cloth. Let's walk over here. So the cucumber plant here is my first one that I put in May. It's getting some shade on the bottom. It has mulch on the bottom. It gets water just about every day. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm not using any shade cloth on here. When I do the care video for August for cucumbers and squash, tomatoes, peppers, I'll be talking about this. But regular spraying of peppermint oil keeps the spider mites down, no issues, and then regular feeding and watering is really helping this cucumber take off. I haven't put any shade cloth over it. But for cucumbers, I would recommend mid-90s and higher, consistent watering, and you definitely want to go with, I think, a 50% shade cloth. You don't need anything bigger than that. Natural die-off. When it gets hot, no shade cloth. This plant's turning yellow, dying back. Coming into here, this is where we started. This is 50% shade cloth. And it's just propped up on the posts, the T-posts. These are 8-foot T-posts. Just drop it over, put this up, I don't know, sometime in the middle of July, and it's doing its trick. Here is another 50% shade cloth, just propped up on the posts, and then using the grommets. You definitely always want these, and they come with those little ties up there. Just tied it to the cattle panel, and the southern sun is out that way, western sun is this way, keeps everything cooler, plenty of sun gets in. Different tomatoes are going to look different, like these are all nice and green, the guy in there is a little bit yellow. Shade cloth, water, mulch. That's what's going to help your tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers beat the heat so that you get continued production. Other ways I'm using it is just setting up, you know, something like this. I think this is a 6-foot by, I don't know, 20-foot piece of 70% shade cloth being used to cover my lettuces. So I'm starting my cool weather crops early. If I had peppers down there, I'd want this to be a 50% shade cloth, you know, and the temperatures are starting to get into the mid-90s, upper 90s. I definitely want the shade cloth out. But a 70% works really well for your cool weather crops. And you can set something up like this. If anything, you know, that you want to kind of beat the heat with the shade cloth, this setup works really well. Just a couple of posts, secured it to the fence. I just did a bow tie, you know, with some jute. That's going to be perfect. If it gets, you know, a break in the weather, we're getting the low 80s, I'll just undo the bow tie, drop the shade cloth, let the lettuce get what it needs. And I just want to add in real quick, I've talked about this in other videos. If you are starting your cool weather crops in August, you want your lettuces and the cool weather crops to get a good 10 to 14 days after germination of getting the full sun. That sun will help them establish, keep them from getting, you know, kind of leggy. If you put the shade cloth up right away, sometimes those crops can get a little bit leggy. So give them 10 to 14 days of the sun, just water them every day. Then after 14 days, put up your shade cloth. Here's another example. You could have tomatoes growing in there, determinate varieties maybe, shorter indeterminates, peppers, even cucumbers. Just drop the shade cloth over that. What I'm growing in here is actually peas. So I don't want the shade cloth up now, because same thing as I just said with the cool weather crops. You want the peas to germinate, grow a good 10, 14 days in the sun, and then you go ahead and drop the shade cloth on. Facing this way, behind me, is the morning sun. That sun's perfect. Southern sun would come in from there, western sun from over there. This shade cloth will protect this space, keep the soil cooler, and whatever you're growing under there is going to do a lot better. The whole goal with shade cloth is to keep your peppers, your tomatoes, and your cucumbers producing. 50% shade cloth is really light. You can actually just throw it over the plant if you want to. There's some fencing under there that keeps everything supported. Strategy for in here is I created sort of a dome with the cucumber plant itself. Weed it out, or reduce the leaves on the bottom. The leaves themselves from the cucumber plant are helping to keep the soil cooler. But just by dropping on that 50% shade cloth, that will cool things down even more, and that can protect your cucumber plants from getting yellow, from getting beat up. Again, we're talking that 95, 100 degree range. If your garden is sitting in 100 degree temperatures for a prolonged period, you definitely want to use shade cloth. It's going to make all the difference. Keep up on the watering and the mulching, but shade cloth will really help you keep those plants producing, get them through the high heat parts of the summer, and you're going to be a lot happier for it. Thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. And I just wanted to give you a couple of ways and some general, ideas of how to use shade cloth in your garden for tomatoes, peppers, and cucumber plants. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 750,000 subscribers. Every person helps. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching.